My son's wife handed me a document 16 days after I buried my husband, and she did it the way she did most things, efficiently, pleasantly, with a smile that left no room for the conversation you actually needed to have. The paper was a codicil, supposedly signed by my husband in the hospice 22 days before he died. It transferred the house to our son outright, not to me first, and then to him. Straight to him. 31 years we had lived in that house, and my name was nowhere on that page. Just look it over, my daughter-in-law said. Take your time. I said I would. I did not tell her what I had already noticed. My husband's signature on that codicil looked nothing like my husband's signature. I had read that man's handwriting for over 3 decades. That was not his hand. 6 months later, a court officer walked into her law office with papers of my own. Good day. My name is Myra Colston. I appreciate you being here, and I would ask you to stay with me until the end. There is something I want you to hear. Not just about what happened, but about what I learned when I stopped waiting for someone to rescue me and started paying attention myself. If this story matters to you, please leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from. It helps me more than you know. Virgil and I were married for 34 years. He was a structural engineer, the kind of man who could not walk past a building without quietly assessing its load-bearing walls, which was occasionally frustrating at parties and always reassuring when it counted. He had a laugh that arrived without warning, a great rolling thing that embarrassed him slightly and delighted everyone else. He had a habit of leaving his reading glasses in every room of the house, which is why I still find them sometimes, in places I have already cleaned twice. We bought the house on Hawthorne Ridge in Asheville, North Carolina in 1993, when it needed everything. New plumbing, a roof that was more ambition than function, a kitchen that hadn't been meaningfully updated since the Eisenhower administration. Virgil looked at it the way he looked at everything, past the current condition toward what it could become. He said it had good bones. I said it had a leaking ceiling and linoleum floors in 3 separate patterns. He said those were temporary problems. He was right, as he usually was about structural things. We had 1 son together, Monty, who was 8 when we moved in and grew up climbing the oak tree in the backyard and swearing, the way young people do, that he would never stay in a mountain city. He came back at 35, the way they always do. He brought his wife Fallon, whom he had met in law school. She was a real estate attorney, and she was sharp in a way that was easy to mistake for competence and harder to recognize as something else, a precision that was always in service of a specific outcome, and the outcome was rarely yours. They settled 20 minutes away. We had 2 grandchildren from them, a boy and a girl, 7 and 9 when Virgil had his first stroke. He recovered mostly, but not entirely. A dragging in his left foot, the occasional word that wouldn't come, a fatigue that settled into him like weather and never fully lifted. He retired the following year. We adjusted. You do, when you have been married long enough to know that the person matters more than the version of the person you originally planned on. The second stroke took more. He spent 6 weeks in the hospital, then came home with physical therapists, a walker, and the quiet dignity of a man who hated being helped and had learned, over 2 difficult years, to accept it without making the person helping feel guilty for offering. Those 14 months at home were hard and also precious in a way I could not have predicted. We watched every film he had always meant to see. I read to him in the evenings. He told me, more than once, that the house was mine. Not possessively, just as a fact he wanted settled between us, on record, even if the only record was me. This is yours, Myra. After me, this is yours. He had a will. Our family attorney, a methodical man named Mr. Darden, who had handled our estate planning for over a decade, had drafted it and updated it 4 years before the end. The house by then had appreciated considerably. Asheville had done that to property, turned quiet mountain homes into something the market treated like treasure. Appraisals put Hawthorne Ridge at $2.1 million. The will was clear. Everything to me first, and then, upon my death, the estate to Monty. Virgil went into hospice in October. He died on a Thursday in November, 23 days after he arrived. I was in the room. I did not collapse after. I wanted to, and there were days when I did, privately in the bathroom with the door shut. But there were services to arrange, paperwork to navigate, neighbors arriving with food, children moving through the house. I functioned on something that was not quite strength, more like forward motion. You continue because stopping feels, in those first weeks, like a second loss. Then Fallon sat across from me at my kitchen table and placed the document between us. I am not an attorney, but I spent 34 years managing household finances and reviewing contracts when Virgil's assistant was out, and I understood what documents were trying to accomplish. I looked at the codicil. Dated October 14th. Virgil had arrived at hospice on October 10th. He had been on a morphine protocol by the second day. I had been in that room. I knew what October 14th looked like. And I looked at the signature, the particular way his name began, the long initial stroke he had used since before I knew him, and something in me went very still. I said I'd need a few days. Fallon said of course. She called on day 4. I said I was still thinking. She said Miss Monte only wanted what was fair. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down every question I had. If the codicil had been signed on October 14th, who had witnessed it? The document listed 2 witnesses and a notary. I didn't recognize any of the names. If Virgil had wanted to revise his estate plan, why had he not contacted Mr. Darden, who had handled everything for over a decade and whom Virgil trusted completely? There was no indication Mr. Darden had been involved at all. That was the first question. The second was the hospice. They documented everything: medication administration, level of consciousness, response to stimulation. Those records existed. And I, as Virgil's spouse and healthcare proxy, had every right to request them. I called the hospice the next morning. They said 2 to 3 weeks for the records. I wrote the date on my legal pad. Then I called Rosalind. Rosalind has been my closest friend since we were roommates at UNC in 1974. She lives in Black Mountain now, 20 minutes east of Asheville, in a house she has made into the most comfortable place I have ever been. She answered on the second ring. I told her what Fallon had brought me. "Tell me about the signature," she said. I told her. A pause. "Don't sign anything," she said, "not yet." I told her I had no intention of it. "Good. Come Thursday. Bring the document." Rosalind read the codicil carefully that Thursday, which said something because Rosalind was a retired pharmacist with no legal training whatsoever. But she had always read carefully. It was how she had moved through the world. She looked up once and said, "Who's the notary?" I said I didn't recognize the name. Honora Gillis. "Find out where she works," Rosalind said. "That's the piece I'd want to understand." It took me one afternoon. Honora Gillis maintained a notary practice out of an office suite in downtown Asheville. She shared a building, the same building, different floor, with a property management company. The building also housed, on the 4th floor, my daughter-in-law's law firm. I wrote that on my legal pad and underlined it once. The hospice records arrived 3 weeks later. I called Rosalind, who drove over that same afternoon, and we read through them together at the kitchen table. The nursing notes from October 14th were detailed and specific. At 6:15 in the morning, Virgil had been assessed as non-responsive. By mid-morning, he was documented as minimally arousable. The afternoon entry was the same. The evening medication log noted his morphine dosage had been adjusted upward at noon because he appeared to be in pain. I read that entry 3 times. And then I found, on an observation sheet from 3:47 in the afternoon, a nursing note. Family member present. Patient was agitated upon handling. Comfort measures maintained. The family member was logged as Fallon Colston, daughter-in-law. She had been there, on that day, with a document she needed signed. I sat very still. Then I said to Rosalind quietly, she was there. Rosalind didn't answer. She just put her hand over mine and left it. That night, after she drove home, I made a decision. I was 69 years old. I had buried my husband 6 weeks before. I was being pressured to relinquish the home I had lived in for 31 years on the basis of a document I was now nearly certain had been fabricated, and by a woman who had been present in that hospice room on the very day the document was supposedly signed, while my husband lay unresponsive and medicated. I was not going to sign anything, and I was not going to do nothing. I found the name of a probate litigation firm through the North Carolina Bar Association's referral directory. Webb and Alcott, Asheville. The attorney I was connected with was named Claudia Webb, who had spent 20 years handling contested estates and will challenges in western North Carolina. I made an appointment for the following Tuesday. I wore my good wool coat to that meeting, the dark blue one I had bought for Virgil's retirement dinner. Some occasions require being dressed as seriously as the matter deserves. Claudia Webb was in her early 50s, with a quality of focused attention that made you feel, the moment she looked at you, that she had already seen the shape of the problem and was waiting with patience while you finished describing it. She asked me to start from the beginning. I talked for nearly 2 hours. She took notes and asked questions the way a skilled person makes incisions. Nothing wasted, nothing decorative. When I finished, she said, "The notary's building proximity is notable, but the nursing record is what interests me most." "Because it places Fallon there," I said. "Because it establishes opportunity," she said. "If we can demonstrate that Virgil lacked the capacity to execute a legal instrument on October 14th, and the clinical record makes a compelling case, then the codicil is invalid regardless of what else we find. The notarization becomes a secondary issue, though also a serious one." She told me she would file a petition to contest the codicil. That would freeze the estate proceedings and require a full evidentiary hearing. She told me Monty and Fallon would respond aggressively. She told me I should prepare for a prolonged process and that I should not be surprised when it became personal. I said I understood. She looked at me for a moment. "People in your situation sometimes feel guilty for fighting, as if needing to contest something means they are questioning their family." "My husband told me this house was mine," I said. "He said it to me directly, more than once, in the last 2 years of his life. He had a will. He had an attorney he trusted. What was brought to me 16 days after his death was not his intention. It was someone else's intention." Claudia nodded. "Then we'll make sure that's on the record," she said. I retained her that afternoon. I drove home, made a pot of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table where Fallon had laid the codicil 2 months before. The house was quiet the way houses are when you have been the only one in them for long enough that the quiet has changed character. I thought about Virgil. I thought about October 14th, and I thought, someone made a serious miscalculation. They assumed they were dealing with a woman too deep in grief to look closely. They were wrong about what grief does and wrong about who I was inside it. Claudia filed the petition. The estate was frozen pending a hearing. I know Monty received word because he called me that same evening, and the voice that came through the phone was not the voice of my son. It was the voice of someone who had been coached. "Mom, Fallon says you've hired an attorney." "That's correct." "She says you're contesting the codicil." "Also correct." A pause, then Dad wanted us provided for. "Your father's will provided for both of us," I said. "The document Fallon brought me is not your father's will." Another pause. She had it witnessed. She had it notarized. "Monte," I said, "your father was non-responsive on October 14th. I have the hospice records. I was in that room. Fallon's was also in that room, according to the nursing log." The quality of the silence changed. He had not known about the nursing log. I could feel him processing something he had not been given permission to process before. He said, finally, flatly, "This is going to get ugly." Then he hung up. 3 days later, Fallon sent a letter through her own firm, Professional, on letterhead, asserting that the records were incomplete, that Virgil had experienced a period of afternoon lucidity on October 14th, during which he'd expressed his wishes and requested the document. The letter also noted that prolonged litigation would deplete the estate for all parties. Claudia read it and said, without looking up, "They're worried." Discovery took months. Claudia subpoenaed Honora Gillis's notarial journal. Every notary in North Carolina is required by law to maintain a contemporaneous record of every act performed, including date, time, name of signer, and document type. The journal was produced. There was no entry for October 14th. The date before had an entry. The date after had an entry. October 14th had none. There was also the matter of Fallon's own billing records, subpoenaed as part of the discovery into the codicil's preparation. She had billed time for drafting the document. The billing entry was dated September 29th, 15 days before Virgil was admitted to hospice. 15 days before the document was supposedly prepared at his direction while he lay in a hospice bed. She had drafted it before he even went in. I read that in Claudia's office on a gray February afternoon and felt something settle inside me. Not triumph, something more structural, confirmation. The hearing was in the spring. Monty did not attend. Fallon's attorneys appeared and presented their arguments about lucid intervals and the possibility of clinical documentation being incomplete. The hospice medical director testified carefully and precisely about what the nursing record indicated regarding Virgil's level of consciousness on October 14th. She used clinical language that translated simply, a man in his condition on that day could not have meaningfully executed a legal instrument. When Claudia presented the notarial journal, or rather the absence of the required October 14th entry, and then placed the billing records beside it, showing the document had been drafted September 29th, Fallon's lead attorney requested a recess. The recess lasted 30 minutes. When proceedings resumed, they withdrew their defense of the codicil. The judge vacated it from the record. Virgil's original will stood. The house on Hawthorne Ridge was mine. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and looked at the courtroom. I thought about Virgil leaving his reading glasses everywhere. I thought about the oak tree. I thought about what it had cost to pay attention when grief would have made it so much easier not to. What followed was not tidy, and I won't present it that way. A complaint was filed with the North Carolina State Bar, arising from the questions the proceedings had raised. Fallon's law license was suspended for 18 months. Her firm did not renew her position when it lapsed. Honora Gillis faced a separate proceeding through the Secretary of State's office regarding her notary commission. I did not pursue either matter beyond what the court itself had initiated. That was not why I had fought. Monty called me in June. It was the first call since the hearing, and the careful, managed quality that had been in his voice for nearly a year was gone. He sounded tired. He sounded like himself. "Mom," he said, "I need to tell you I'm sorry." I let him finish. He told me what he had told himself he didn't know, and what he now understood he had chosen not to look at. He said he had believed Fallon when she said his father had asked for it. He said he should have asked more questions. He said he didn't expect a simple apology to cover it. "Monte," I said, "your father loved you. That house was always going to be yours eventually. You just couldn't wait." He was quiet. "That's not fair," he said, but his voice was soft when he said it, not defensive, as if he was checking whether he believed it himself. "I know," I said, "but it's true." We talked for another hour, not about the legal proceedings, not about Fallon, but about Virgil. Stories I had forgotten, I remembered, things Monty had seen that I hadn't been there for. It was the first real conversation we'd had since before his father died. I won't say we came through it repaired, but we came through it. He began bringing the grandchildren to visit again in August. The first time, both of them ran straight to the oak tree, which told me Virgil had taken them out there when I wasn't watching. The boy asked if he could climb it. I said yes, carefully, and stood underneath with my arms slightly raised, which accomplished nothing structurally but seemed like the thing to do. I did not sell the house. I thought about it genuinely. The market was generous, and somewhere warmer in January had real appeal. But every time I walked through the rooms, I understood what Virgil had meant when he said it was mine, not the money. The accumulated weight of a life lived in one place. the specific evidence of having existed here for a long time with someone who mattered. I planted a rose garden along the south fence this spring, something I had always meant to do. Virgil would have had opinions about the drainage. I thought about that while I worked, and it made me laugh once, into the garden, at nothing in particular. Rosalind came for a long weekend in October. We sat on the screened porch in the evenings and talked the way women who have known each other for 50 years talk, without performing, without needing to arrive anywhere specific. She told me I seemed different than I had a year ago. I asked her how. "Like you know where you are," she said. "I think I'm still learning it," I said. "That's enough," she said. It was. What I know now, at the far end of this year, is something I would not have believed when I was sitting at that kitchen table, reading a document that was meant to end my claim on my own life. Grief is real. It is large and it is heavy, and it makes you quiet in ways that people close to you can see and sometimes choose to use. What the people who drafted that codicil did not account for is what happens when the quiet becomes something else. When you pick up a legal pad and begin writing questions. When you call a friend at 11 o'clock at night and say, out loud, what you have been afraid to say. When you put on your good coat and walk into an attorney's office and tell the truth about what you know. I did not fight for the money. I fought because my husband told me this house was mine, and I was the only person left who understood exactly what he meant when he said it. That turned out to be enough. If this story stayed with you, I hope you'll leave a comment. Tell me where you're listening from, and if you've ever had to fight for something that was already yours, I would very much like to hear about it.